This series begins by showing a fat young man named Park Hyung-suk who is being bullied by his schoolmates. One of the bullies, Tae-sung, even treated Hyung-suk like a pet who could be told to do everything he asked. Hyung-suk, who could no longer stand being bullied both physically and mentally, then asked his mother to let him transfer to another school so that he wouldn't get bullied anymore. At first, his mother objected to moving Hyung-suk to another school, as it cost a lot of money while they were poor. However, after Hyung-suk's mother, Mrs. Park, saw with her own eyes that her son was always getting bullied at his school, she finally decided to transfer Hyung-suk to another school so that her son would no longer suffer from being bullied. After packing up his belongings, Hyung-suk left for Hongdae to start a new chapter in his life. From now on, he would be living alone as his mother could not move in with him due to her job. One day, when Hyung-suk was walking down the streets of Hongdae, he accidentally bumped into a girl named Kim Mi-jin. Hyung-suk thought that Mi-jin might scold him, as people usually did. But unexpectedly, Mi-jin politely apologized to Hyung-suk, even asking about Hyung-suk's condition since he fell down when they collided. Not long after, Mi-jin's friend, Lee Jin-sung, appeared and thought that Hyung-suk had bullied Mi-jin. Jin-sung, who misunderstood Hyung-suk's attitude and thought that Hyung-suk was belittling him, suddenly became angry and beat Hyung-suk in public. People who saw the incident recorded the beating and uploaded the video footage to social media while writing insulting captions against Hyung-suk. Upon arriving home, Hyung-suk became even more sad and devastated after reading people's comments on the video as they made fun of him just because of his physical appearance. Some people even commented that because of his physical appearance, Hyung-suk deserved to be bullied wherever he was. Hyung-suk could only cry in frustration, as he hoped that he could start a new chapter in his life in Hongdae, but instead he was humiliated by many people on social media after Jin-sung beat him up. Later that night, Hyung-suk woke up and found something wrong with himself. When Hyung-suk looked at his reflection in the mirror, he was shocked to find that he had turned into someone else. Hyung-suk apparently didn't recognize himself who had changed into a more handsome and athletic person, even his height had changed. Hyung-suk, who was confused by the changes in himself, then returned to his room and found that his fat self was asleep in his room. Hyung-suk then tried to wake up his fat self, and a strange thing happened because Hyung-suk suddenly became his fat self again. Just when Hyung-suk thought it was all a dream, he was suddenly startled by the presence of his handsome self sleeping next to him. When Hyung-suk tried to wake him up, the strangeness happened again, and Hyung-suk now returned to his handsome self, while his fat self fell asleep again. Hyung-suk concluded that he, somehow, ended up having two bodies and could only use one of them if the other was asleep. Since Hyung-suk didn't want to get bullied like he had all his life, he decided to use his handsome body when he went to school. The next day, Hyung-suk, who was currently attending J1 High School, suddenly became the attention of the students at the school because of his handsome and athletic stature like a famous idol. Hyung-suk, who is a new student at the school, is in the fashion and design class because the teacher recommended the fashion and design class when Hyung-suk and his mother enrolled at the school. In the class, Hyung-suk's classmates seemed so dumbfounded by Hyung-suk's physical appearance, which was very handsome, perhaps even more so than the most handsome famous actors or models. Surprisingly, Hyung-suk is in the same class as Jin-sung, who beat him up in public, and also Mi-jin, the girl he accidentally bumped into, who is Jin-sung's friend. Jin-sung seems to have romantic feelings for Mi-jin, as he seems annoyed when Mi-jin is fascinated by Hyung-suk's good looks. Not only Mi-jin, a girl named Park Han-oh was also fascinated by Hyung-suk's good looks. Even she openly approached Hyung-suk and praised his good looking that seemed to be unmatched in the school. During break time, Hyung-suk, who looked confused while in the cafeteria, was then approached by Han-oh, who explained several things about the school, one of which was about several classes in the school. Not only fashion and design class, J1 High School also has vocal and dance class, architecture class, sport class, and so on. The students who are members of these classes are expected to get a job immediately after they graduate from school. While in class, Hyung-suk, who was feeling bored, suddenly became sleepy and fell asleep. At the same time, the fat Hyung-suk, who had been sleeping at home, suddenly woke up and immediately realized that the handsome Hyung-suk who was at school was asleep. Hyung-suk suddenly became panicked and tried to make himself fall asleep so that the handsome Hyung-suk could wake up immediately. When Hyung-suk was frustrated because he couldn't sleep, suddenly the handsome Hyung-suk woke up because Han-oh woke him up to tell him that the class was over and they had to go home immediately. Hyung-suk was very grateful to Han-oh because she had saved him, even though Han-oh didn't understand what she had done to make Hyung-suk very grateful to her. While the handsome Hyung-suk would take over his consciousness during the day, the fat Hyung-suk would take his place at night. To make ends meet, the fat Hyung-suk worked part-time at a convenience store all night. Although the convenience store owner was hesitant to hire the fat Hyung-suk, he finally hired him after he managed to memorize the names of all the cigarette brands sold in the convenience store. While doing his job, Hyung-suk was surprised by the arrival of his classmates who wanted to buy a pack of cigarettes. Since they were still high school students and considered underage, Hyung-suk refused to sell them cigarettes, even though they had shown someone else's ID. Not long after, Jin-song showed up, and upon seeing the fat Hyung-suk, Jin-song immediately took advantage of Hyung-suk's position as a convenience store employee by grabbing some snacks and drinks, then told Hyung-suk to pay for all the food. When Jin-song realized that the fat Hyung-suk had the same name as the handsome Hyung-suk in his class, Jin-song suddenly felt annoyed and beat up the fat Hyung-suk. One of Jin-song's friends then pulled down Hyung-suk's pants and photographed him while threatening to spread the embarrassing photo if Hyung-suk reported them to the police. After Jin-song and his friends left the convenience store, Hyung-suk got a call from his mother, who was worried about him because she hadn't heard from him since he moved to Hongdae. Hyung-suk's mother hung up immediately after confirming that her son was fine. In order to make ends meet and pay Hyung-suk's school fees, Mrs. Park worked late at night to collect some used cardboard from one place to another. The next day at school, Hyung-suk had just arrived at his class when Jin-song and his friends were discussing the bullying they did to the fat Hyung-suk last night. Because his classmates insulted his mother, Hyung-suk suddenly felt angry and warned them not to involve his mother. Upon hearing that, people's attention was immediately drawn to Hyung-suk because he was brave enough to warn Jin-song and his friends, who were the class bullies. On the other hand, Jin-song, who realized that Mi-jin was impressed by Hyung-suk's bravery, became irritated and started a fight with Hyung-suk. Mi-jin tried to stop Jin-song, but Jin-song was already angry and jealous that Mi-jin was more interested in Hyung-suk. Their fight suddenly attracted the attention of the students, who crowded around them and prepared to film the fight. When Jin-song was about to hit Hyung-suk, a male student named Hong Jae-yul suddenly grabbed Jin-song's arm, trying to stop him. But Jin-song immediately swatted away Jae-yul's hand and aimed a punch at Hyung-suk's face. Surprisingly, Hyung-suk managed to dodge the attack, even ducking every punch from Jin-song, who had the skills of a professional boxer. Although Jin-song managed to corner Hyung-suk, Hyung-suk was able to withstand Jin-song's punches, and even counterattacked by hitting Jin-song in the stomach. With that one punch, Hyung-suk knocked out Jin-song, who was one of the school's most feared delinquents. The news of Jin-song's defeat immediately spread around the school, and some of the bully students from the vocal and dance class and architecture class seemed shocked that Jin-song, who had the skills of a professional boxer, could be defeated so easily by a new student who was able to knock him out with just one punch. Moreover, they had also heard that Hyung-suk was also very popular because of his good looks, so they were determined to destroy Hyung-suk. One night, Hyung-suk, who was working at a convenience store, saw a bespectacled young man named Park Ji-ho who entered the store with suspicious movements, as if he intended to steal something from the store. When Ji-ho actually steals something from the convenience store, Hyung-suk rushes after Ji-ho because he will be immediately fired from his job if he allows the theft. Unexpectedly, Ji-ho was forced to steal from the convenience store by his classmates, who were also Hyung-suk's classmates. The bully students then forced Ji-ho and Hyung-suk to fight each other, while they would record their fights, then upload the videos to social media to humiliate them. In the midst of the bullying, one of the bully students from architecture class named Bosco suddenly appeared and immediately chased away the students who were bullying Hyung-suk and Ji-ho. Because of his thug-like stature, Bosco could easily scare his opponents, even with just a little bluff. After the bullies ran away, Ji-ho and Hyung-suk immediately thanked Bosco, who turned out to be a good person and always defended the weak because he hated people who used their strength to intimidate people who were more weaker than them. The next day at school, Hanol told Hyung-suk that Bosco was the leader of the Burn Knuckle Gang, one of the most feared gangs in the school. While eating lunch, Hyung-suk, who saw Bosco's arrival, intended to greet him, hoping to be friends with Bosco because he defended the fat Hyung-suk last night. However, Bosco, who heard the news about Hyung-suk defeating Jin-song in a fight, immediately assumed that Hyung-suk was a bad person who often bullied others. Therefore, Bosco immediately approached Hyung-suk and grabbed his shoulder with one hand, forcing Hyung-suk to sit back in his seat. The students who saw the incident suddenly gasped and thought that Hyung-suk would not be able to fight back, because Bosco was the toughest student in the school. But surprisingly, Hyung-suk was able to break Bosco's grip on his shoulder, even getting up from his chair to face Bosco. Everyone who saw the incident was dumbfounded, because this was the first time they had seen someone who was able to put up a fight against Bosco, even with just one hand. When Bosco was about to throw a punch at Hyung-suk's face, one of Bosco's friends, Park Bom-jae, suddenly appeared to stop Bosco. Upon knowing that Hyung-suk did not intend to confront Bosco because he mistakenly recognized Bosco as someone else, Bom-jae then asked Bosco to let Hyung-suk and invite him to lunch. One of Bosco's friends then scolded Bom-jae because he stopped Bosco when Bosco was about to hit Hyung-suk. But Bom-jae then argued by saying that Bosco might lose if he got into a fight with Hyung-suk, because apparently, Hyung-suk had enough physical strength to bruise Bosco's hand with just the grip of his hand. After Hyung-suk was able to give Bosco a fight, his classmates who had bullied the fat Hyung-suk yesterday became impressed and asked Hyung-suk to be friends with them. Later that night, Hyung-suk gathered with Jin-song and his friends in Hanul at a tavern. They seemed surprised to see Hyung-suk wearing oversized clothes, and Hyung-suk only said that he borrowed the clothes from his roommate. After hearing that Hyung-suk's roommate worked at night and had clothes that were too big for Hyung-suk to wear, Hanul and the others assumed that Hyung-suk's roommate was probably a big and burly gang leader, so they became more afraid and respectful of Hyung-suk. Hyung-suk and Jin-song later make up after Hyung-suk apologizes for hitting Jin-song and says that Jin-song and Mi-jin would make a good couple if they dated. After Jin-song collapsed from being too drunk, his friends then talked about Ji-ho and made fun of him. Hyung-suk, who was annoyed that they had intimidated Ji-ho, drank a glass of soju and approached one of Jin-song's friends who intended to upload a video of Ji-ho's fight with the fat Hyung-suk. Hyung-suk angrily snatches the phone and smashes it before he uploads the embarrassing video to social media. But then, Hyung-suk suddenly collapsed unconscious under the influence of alcohol. At the same time, the fat Hyung-suk woke up at home and rushed to the tavern where the handsome Hyung-suk was because he couldn't fall asleep, so he couldn't make the handsome wake up on his own. Upon arrival, Hanul and the others were confused by the appearance of the fat Hyung-suk, who claimed that he had been ordered by Hyung-suk's roommate to pick up Hyung-suk. When he was about to go home, Jin-song, who saw the one-punch game machine, then asked his friend for a coin because he intended to play the game. Before throwing his punch, Jin-song told the fat Hyung-suk to pay attention to his every move, which is an attacking technique in boxing. Hyung-suk then asked why Jin-song told him to pay attention to the technique, and Jin-song just told Hyung-suk to learn the technique so that he wouldn't get beaten up by others. After Jin-song and the others left, Hyung-suk then tried to perform the technique that Jin-song had previously taught him, but his punch missed the target. A disappointed Hyung-suk hurriedly left the place while carrying the handsome Hyung-suk's body on his back. However, unbeknownst to Hyung-suk, Bosco and friends were watching him from a distance, and Bosco realized that Hyung-suk's punches were able to tear the punching bag lining, even though Hyung-suk was unable to score. Bosco was secretly impressed with fat Hyung-suk's strength, so he tried playing the game and managed to score higher than Jin-song. The next day at school, Hyung-suk is relieved to find out that Ji-ho has entered the school, and then approaches Ji-ho and asks how he is doing while they are in the cafeteria. At the same time, Ji-ho is surprised that Hyung-suk suddenly greets him and asks how he's doing. Hyung-suk even invited Ji-ho to have lunch with him, which suddenly made Hanul and their schoolmates dumbfounded because the handsome and popular Hyung-suk was so friendly with Ji-ho, who was considered a loser. Although his schoolmates wondered why he was being friendly to Ji-ho, Hyung-suk didn't care about them because he wanted to be friends with Ji-ho. One day, Mrs. Park visited her son in Hongdae and seemed surprised to find Hyung-suk sleeping when he should have been at school. At the same time, the handsome Hyung-suk, who had just returned from school, was surprised to find his door open. After going inside, Hyung-suk found his mother, who was cleaning his room. The handsome Hyung-suk then introduced himself as Hyung-suk's roommate and told his mother about Hyung-suk working part-time at the convenience store. Not wanting to wake up the fat Hyung-suk, Hyung-suk took his mother to a coffee shop where they got into a conversation about Hyung-suk. Surprisingly, Bosco was also at the coffee shop, as was Bom-jae, who worked part-time as a waiter. Bom-jae then tried to warn Bosco not to start a fight because Bom-jae would lose his job if his friend made trouble in that place. Meanwhile, Mrs. Park looked sad and felt very guilty because she didn't care about her son, so Hyung-suk was often bullied in his former school. Upon hearing that, Hyung-suk was reminded of the moment when he yelled at his mother and blamed her for their poverty and suffering. After realizing that his mother had been working hard to make ends meet, Hyung-suk felt guilty towards his mother for yelling at her. On the other hand, Bosco, who was eavesdropping on their conversation, suddenly felt annoyed because he thought that the handsome Hyung-suk was deceiving Mrs. Park by saying that he was good friends with Mrs. Park's son, who was a convenience store employee. Bosco, who was disgusted with Hyung-suk, even squeezed his cup and caused his milk to spill on a female customer sitting next to him. Bom-jae, who saw the mess, rushed to clean up the spilled milk and apologized to the female customer whose clothes got wet from the spill. Before leaving the coffee shop, Mrs. Park asks about some used cardboard. Bom-jae tells Mrs. Park that she can take the used cardboard because he had intended to throw it away. Hyung-suk then asked why Mrs. Park took the used cardboard. Mrs. Park told him that every day she collected some used cardboard that she would sell to earn money. Mrs. Park does that side job so that she can earn more money to fulfill the needs of Hyung-suk, who lives separately from her. Upon hearing that, Hyung-suk felt sad knowing that his mother worked harder for him. Before leaving, Mrs. Park gave Hyung-suk money to pay for her ice Americano. Although Hyung-suk refused to accept the money, Mrs. Park continued to force him, so he finally accepted the money. Before going home, Mrs. Park asked Hyung-suk to keep her side job a secret from her son because she didn't want her son to worry about her. Mrs. Park also asked Hyung-suk to be a good friend to her son, not realizing that the handsome Hyung-suk in front of her was her son. At the same time, Bosco, who saw them through the window, became even more misunderstood and angrily squeezed his cup until more milk spilled out and causing a mess that required Bong Jae to apologize to the customers and clean up the spilled milk. Bosco, who misunderstood that the handsome Hyung-suk had bullied the fat Hyung-suk and lied to his mother, started attacking the handsome Hyung-suk with punches that were far more dangerous than the punches thrown by Jin-song. Although Hyung-suk managed to dodge the punches, he soon became overwhelmed and Bosco managed to injure his face. Bosco then told Hyung-suk to hand over the money Mrs. Park gave him because he intended to give it to Mrs. Park's son. However, Hyung-suk misunderstood and thought that Bosco was a bully who often forced his victims to hand over their money, so Hyung-suk decided to fight back by using the attack technique that Jin-song had taught him. Surprisingly, Hyung-suk is able to defeat Bosco with the technique, causing him to collapse physically and mentally. Bong Jae, who had just arrived at the place, suddenly felt dumbfounded because Hyung-suk managed to defeat Bosco, the toughest student in the school who had never been defeated. Later that night, Bosco went to the fat Hyung-suk at the convenience store and told him that he was a strong person and advised him to exercise. After getting Bosco's support, Hyung-suk decided that he would try to become stronger by exercising. While Hyung-suk was doing push-ups at the door of the convenience store, a young woman named Choi So-jong suddenly appeared and was a little surprised to see Hyung-suk exercising. However, So-jong didn't mind at all and instead gave Hyung-suk a bottle of energy drink while encouraging him. Hyung-suk, who was mesmerized by So-jong's beauty, immediately became more eager to exercise, hoping to lose weight and become stronger. The next day, J1 high school students were talking about a student named Nam-soo who came to school wearing a famous brand of shoes that was only produced in limited quantities. The students thought that Nam-soo probably came from a rich family because he could afford such expensive shoes. Shortly afterward, Jin-song and his friends arrived at school and Jin-song, who was also wearing the shoes, seemed annoyed that Nam-soo was wearing similar shoes to him even though Jin-song had worn the shoes to school first. Jin-song's friends intended to bully Nam-soo, but Jin-song seemed to have no interest in bullying and just left. His friends were surprised at Jin-song for being too nice to others lately, but they chose not to pursue the matter further, as they didn't want to make Jin-song angry and get into a fight with him. On the other hand, Nam-soo, who could no longer brag about his very expensive shoes, tried to show off the chrome heart ring that he had just bought to his classmates. However, his classmates were mesmerized by Jae-yul, who wore the chrome heart ring on all his fingers, even though the ring was very expensive. Even Nam-soo admits that Jae-yul not only has the chrome heart rings which are very expensive, but also wears a limited edition luxury watch. Hano then asks Jae-yul where he got all these luxury items, but Jae-yul doesn't answer anything. Jin-song, who sits behind Jae-yul, tells Hano that Jae-yul never talks to anyone, so she better not waste time asking him. Mi-jin and Hano think that Jae-yul is actually good-looking and has a good reputation, but Jae-yul is too quiet, so he loses popularity to Jin-song, who is quite fashionable and has quite good fighting skills, and Hyung-suk, who is very handsome and loved by the girls despite his simple appearance. Shortly afterward, Hyung-suk finally arrived at class and he immediately became the center of attention of the girls in their class. Nam-soo and his friends, who realized that Hyung-suk was wearing worn-out shoes and bags, mocked Hyung-suk as a hobo for wearing cheap, worn-out items. Meanwhile, in the architecture class, Bong Jae and his friends were worried about Bosco, who didn't show up, and there were rumors that Bosco had been defeated by Hyung-suk. Bong Jae, who actually knew about the incident, chose not to tell his friends because he didn't want to embarrass Bosco. Not long after, Bosco sent Bong Jae a text message informing him that his cell phone screen was cracked, making it difficult for him to communicate through his cell phone. Instead of telling the truth, Bong Jae told his friends that Bosco asked them not to take any action against Hyung-suk during his absence from school. Bong Jae seemed relieved that his friends seemed to believe the lie he told. Even so, one of his friends, Yira, didn't necessarily believe Bong Jae's words and wanted to confirm it himself. During break time, as Hyung-suk and Jiho walked towards the cafeteria, they saw a student from the vocal and dance class who was being bullied by his classmates. The chubby male student named Peon Dukwa was being bullied by Jin Ho-bin and his friends, who were the bully students from the vocal and dance class. Hyung-suk, who saw Dukwa being bullied, suddenly became reminded of the moment when he was the victim of bullying at his former school, so he intended to defend Dukwa. On the other hand, Jae-yul, who happened to be at that place, looked worried when he saw Hyung-suk about to confront Ho-bin and intended to help him. But then, a teacher suddenly appeared and broke them up, so Ho-bin and his friends chose to leave from there. After that, Hyung-suk tried to help Dukwa to stand up, but Dukwa ignored him and just left. Later that night, when Hyung-suk was working part-time at the convenience store, he met the young woman who had given him a bottle of energy drink. She asked him if he still exercised at night, and when he said yes, she encouraged him as she smiled at him. The next day, Hyung-suk invited Dukwa to have lunch at the cafeteria with him and Ji-ho. At first, Dukwa asks why the handsome and popular Hyung-suk would choose to have lunch with losers like Dukwa and Ji-ho instead of joining popular students like Jin-song. On the other hand, Hanol, who was sitting with Jin-song and his friends, seemed to wonder why Hyung-suk would choose to have lunch with losers instead of joining them. One of them then asked Jin-song if he would let Hyung-suk be friends with the losers. Jin-song replies that they should be consistent with their own decision of making Hyung-suk their friends regardless of what Hyung-suk does. Jin-song added that he had lost interest in bullying, and realized that bullying others was no longer considered cool. Mi-jin, who heard Jin-song's words, smiles happily as Jin-song gradually starts to be kind to people who are weaker than him, instead of bullying them. Meanwhile, Dukwa, who is still suspicious of Hyung-suk, questions why Hyung-suk asked him to be friends with him. Hyung-suk says that they have something in common, and that's why he wants to be friends with Dukwa. Dukwa doesn't believe Hyung-suk's words at first because he and Hyung-suk have nothing in common physically. However, Hyung-suk emphasized that he also came from a poor family, so he could understand Dukwa's suffering. On the other hand, Jae-yul accidentally overhears Nam-soo and his friends who intend to humiliate Hyung-suk in public because they are fed up with Hyung-suk being too popular because he has a very good physical appearance. Not only that, Jae-yul also realized that Yura and his friends from the architecture class intended to gang up on Hyung-suk because they believed that Hyung-suk had defeated Bosco. On the way home, Hyung-suk was suddenly approached by Jae-yul, who gave him a bag filled with branded goods because it was Hyung-suk's birthday that day. Hyung-suk was very grateful to Jae-yul because it was the first time in his life that he got a birthday present from someone other than his mother, even though the luxury items were Jae-yul's belongings that he no longer used, because Jae-yul only used items that were trending. Surprisingly, Jae-yul gave not only a bag, but also several bags of luxury goods to Hyung-suk as a birthday present. In addition, Jae-yul had also beaten up Yura and his friends, so they abandoned their intention to gang up on Hyung-suk. Upon arriving home, Hyung-suk received a call from his mother wishing him a happy birthday. While taking out some luxurious items given by Jae-yul from his bag, Hyung-suk told his mother that he had fun with his friends on his birthday and got many birthday presents. Hyung-suk was very grateful to Jae-yul and thought Jae-yul was a good person. The next day at school, Nam-soo and his friends were preparing to humiliate Hyung-suk in front of their friends. But unexpectedly, Hyung-suk turned out to be wearing some luxurious items given by Jae-yul, so Nam-soo and his friends became upset that they couldn't carry out their plan. Ha-nol and the girls, who were impressed with Hyung-suk's appearance, which now looked cooler after wearing the luxury goods, then asked Hyung-suk where he got the luxury goods from. Hyung-suk said that the luxury items were gifts from his best friend, and Jae-yul, who heard that, seemed to feel happy and relieved that Hyung-suk didn't mention his name. The scene then switches and shows Ho-bin and Dukwa, who are at the LKS Entertainment building to audition to become a rapper. Dukwa uses his time waiting for his turn by writing song lyrics, while Ho-bin mocks him by saying that Dukwa doesn't deserve to be a rapper. Not long after, Ho-bin was asked to enter the audition room and show his skills as a rapper. Ho-bin, who was handsome and had a cool appearance, immediately caught the attention of the producer, who thought that Ho-bin was capable of becoming a famous rapper who had many fans. The producer decided to pass Ho-bin in this audition and told his assistant to send Dukwa away because he had no intention of auditioning Dukwa, whose physical appearance did not meet the standards of their company. Dukwa felt sad and disappointed that the producer refused to listen to his voice just because of his fat body and ugly face. Even people shunned Dukwa because of his ugly physical appearance. Dukwa, who was upset with how people treated him, could only pour his feelings into the song lyrics he wrote and hoped that one day he would be able to sing his own song in front of many people. Dukwa hopes that one day he can be like his idol, Eminem, and make his grandmother happy, who is the only family he has at the moment. The next day, Dukwa is again bullied by Ho-bin and his friends, who make fun of Dukwa because he auditioned to become a rapper. Dukwa, who felt annoyed because he was always getting insults from people, then decided to show his ability by joining the music festival at his school. At night, when Dukwa accompanies his grandmother, who is selling food on the street, he is suddenly surprised by the appearance of Ho-bin and his friends, who claim to be Dukwa's friends. Upon hearing that, Dukwa's grandmother gave them the food for free, and they ate so much of it that there was no food left to sell to the customers. Dukwa tried to stop his grandmother from being too kind to Ho-bin and his friends. However, his grandmother let them finish the food, even giving them kimbap to take home. Ho-bin and his friends pretended to be nice in front of Dukwa's grandmother, but after they walked away, Ho-bin and his friends threw away the food Dukwa's grandmother gave them and called it trash. Dukwa, who saw this, could only hold back his anger because he didn't have enough courage to fight them. The next day at school, Ho-bin and his friends wrote insulting words about the food sold by Dukwa's grandmother and spread a hoax by telling their schoolmates that the food would make them sick. Shortly afterward, Ho-bin and his friends bullied Dukwa in the cafeteria and ordered him to serve them during lunch. Hyung-suk, who saw his friend being treated like that, approached them to defend Dukwa. Surprisingly, Hyung-suk wasn't alone when confronting them, as Jae-yul was suddenly appeared next to him, and Jin-song, who had decided not to bully others, chose to help Hyung-suk face Ho-bin and his friends. However, even though Jin-song chose to side with Hyung-suk, who was defending a loser like Dukwa, Ho-bin was not at all deterred and felt confident that he could defeat Jin-song, who had pretty good fighting skills. But unexpectedly, Bosco and his group arrived at the cafeteria and decided to support Hyung-suk, because he was fed up with people who often bullied people who were more weaker than them. With Bosco, who was the toughest student in J1 High School, joining to support Hyung-suk, Ho-bin and his friends decided to leave because they realized that they couldn't beat Bosco and his group. Bosco then asked why Hyung-suk was defending Dukwa and accused that Hyung-suk only wanted to make Dukwa his servant by pretending to defend him. However, Hyung-suk firmly denied the accusation and emphasized that he only wanted to help Dukwa. Bosco, who doesn't easily believe the words of others, prepares to start a fight with Hyung-suk. But Bong Jae immediately stopped his leader and asked Bosco not to act rashly by starting a fight at school that could cause them to get punished. Upon hearing that, Bosco abandoned his intention to fight Hyung-suk and left him. Everyone who witnessed the incident suddenly became more impressed with Hyung-suk because he bravely defended a loser like Dukwa, and even managed to get Jin-song and Jae-yul to side with him against Ho-bin and his friends. Even so, Dukwa didn't seem too impressed with what Hyung-suk did for him, as he chose to ignore Hyung-suk, who tried to help him. After Dukwa walks away, Hyung-suk accidentally finds Dukwa's application form for the school music festival that Ho-bin had torn up when he found out that Dukwa was planning to participate in the festival. Hyung-suk then took the torn registration form and tried to stick it back together with duct tape. The next day, Hyung-suk waited for Dukwa at the school gate and intended to return the form to Dukwa. But Dukwa pushed Hyung-suk's hand away because he was fed up with Hyung-suk constantly being nice to him just to be popular at school, even though Hyung-suk genuinely wanted to help Dukwa. Meanwhile, in vocal and dance class, Ho-bin tells his classmates that the producer from LKS Entertainment is coming to watch their school's music festival, and Ho-bin plans to show his best performance in the music festival so that he can get an exclusive contract from the record company. In the afternoon, Ho-bin and his friends bully Dukwa again in the backyard of the school. Even Ho-bin deliberately tears up Dukwa's lyric book. On the other hand, Hyung-suk, who was cleaning the classroom by himself, seemed to be thinking about Hano's words suggesting that Hyung-suk participate in the music festival at their school, because Hano was sure that Hyung-suk could attract the attention of many people in the festival. Hyung-suk then remembers the hard times when he was bullied, and the only thing that could comfort and calm him was thinking of a song whose lyrics really represented his feelings. Hyung-suk also recalled his mother complimenting his singing voice and asking him to be more confident in his abilities. Hyung-suk, who could now feel and understand Dukwa's sadness, got so carried away that he unknowingly sang a song with all his heart. Dukwa, who heard the melodious singing, was suddenly stunned and rushed to find out the person who was able to sing the song wholeheartedly, as if that person understood his sadness and suffering. However, Dukwa was surprised to find that the person with the melodious voice was Hyung-suk. Dukwa, who regained his courage and confidence after listening to Hyung-suk's singing, decided to rise from his slump. Dukwa, who intends to participate in a music festival at school, then asks Hyung-suk to be his partner when he appears on stage to sing his song. At first, Hyung-suk seemed very surprised and insecure, because Dukwa suddenly asked him to sing a duet with Dukwa's song. But after Dukwa reassured him, Hyung-suk decided to help Dukwa and hoped that they could perform while at the music festival. The next day after school, Dukwa invited Hyung-suk to his house because they were going to practice singing his song. Dukwa was actually embarrassed by the cramped and shabby condition of his house because he thought that Hyung-suk came from a rich family. However, Dukwa is again surprised by Hyung-suk's knowledge of how to save money and use old newspapers for various household needs. Hyung-suk revealed that his mother had taught him all that since he was a child, so he was used to doing it. Dukwa then showed him the arrangement of the song, and he was excited to tell Hyung-suk that he would be the rapper, while Hyung-suk would be the lead vocalist with his melodious voice. After practicing, Hyung-suk told Dukwa that he had to do a part-time job at night, so they could only practice during lunchtime at school. Dukwa then introduced Hyung-suk to his grandmother, who invited him to eat after learning that Hyung-suk was Dukwa's friend. Despite feeling hungry, Hyung-suk politely declined Dukwa's grandmother's offer and immediately said goodbye to Dukwa and his grandmother. Meanwhile, Ho-bin was seen at the LKS Entertainment building, where he met with the producer, who specifically asked a famous song lyricist and composer to create a song that would be sung by Ho-bin and his friend, Jonggi, in their school's music festival. The producer promised that the song could be their debut song if they managed to get appreciation from many people in the music festival. A few days later, Dukwa and Hyung-suk were seen practicing their vocals during lunchtime at school, as the music festival was coming up in 2 weeks. Hyung-suk even practiced his vocals while he worked part-time at the convenience store in order to maximize his performance when singing in front of a large crowd. At the same time, Sojong, who visited the convenience store several times, accidentally heard Hyungsuk while he was singing and praised Hyungsuk's voice, which she thought was very melodious. Upon realizing that Hyungsuk had a little trouble with his throat, she gave Hyungsuk a box of lozenges and encouraged him. The next day, Dukwa and Hyungsuk practiced vocals in the schoolyard accompanied by Jiho. After practice, Hyungsuk decided to go straight home because he had to work part-time. After Hyungsuk leaves, Dukwa and Jiho are surprised by the appearance of Hobin and his friends, who again bully Dukwa physically and mentally after they find out that Dukwa plans to perform at the music festival and duet with Hyungsuk. After beating Dukwa to a pulp, Hobin then orders Jiho to hit Dukwa. Jiho tries to fight back, but they threaten him instead. Fortunately, Hobin gets a phone call from someone, so he and his friends leave. Jiho then apologizes to Dukwa for wanting to hit him, even though he was forced to do so by Hobin's orders. Later that night, while Hyungsuk is doing a part-time job at the convenience store, he's surprised by the arrival of Dukwa, who accompanies Jiho to apologize to Hyungsuk because he beat him up a while ago on orders from Jinsung's friends. Hyungsuk tells Jiho that he doesn't mind at all because he knows that Jiho was forced by them to beat him up. The three of them then talk about the bullying they've been subjected to everywhere and anytime, as people perceive them as losers. Even so, Jiho and Dukwa reveal that their lives changed for the better after befriending Hyungsuk, who was always kind to them sincerely. Surprisingly, Bosco was listening to their conversation about Hyungsuk and immediately asked them if Hyungsuk was a good person. Jiho and Dukwa assured Bosco that Hyungsuk was really a good person, while the fat Hyungsuk tried to explain to Bosco that his mother voluntarily gave money to Hyungsuk because she wanted to return the favor for Hyungsuk, who had bought an ice Americano for her. Upon learning that, Bosco finally found out that Hyungsuk was a good person and thanked them for explaining everything, so he no longer misunderstood Hyungsuk. Long story short, the day of the festival arrived. The students from other schools were seen arriving at J1 High School to attend the festival, while the students from J1 High School were busy attracting the customers to stop by their booth. Hanol and Mijin were seen approaching two female students to buy clothes designed by the students of the fashion and design class, while Jin Song and his friends offered money to the visitors who managed to knock Jin Song out. However, until the music festival begins, no one has managed to knock Jin Song out in a boxing match. On the other hand, the architecture class challenged the visitors to a fistfight with Bosco, and whoever managed to beat Bosco in the fistfight was entitled to a prize. However, just like Jinsong, Bosco was very difficult to defeat. Meanwhile, Hyungsuk, who was with Dukwa, accidentally ran into Sojong, who turned out to be a high school student. Sojong comes to J1 High School with a young man named Jonggun who drives a luxury sports car. Upon seeing Sojong's arrival at his school, Hyungsuk tried to greet her. However, Hyungsuk didn't realize that he was greeting Sojong in the body of the handsome Hyungsuk, so Sojong didn't recognize him. Unlike the other girls who were mesmerized by Hyungsuk's good looks, Sojong didn't feel impressed by the handsome Hyungsuk at all, because Sojong thought that Hyungsuk and his schoolmates always judged others solely on their looks. Hyungsuk tried to reach Sojong to explain that he was different from his schoolmates, but Jonggun immediately stopped him and grabbed his hand. Surprisingly, Hyungsuk managed to free his hand from Jonggun's grip. Even so, Hyungsuk couldn't avoid Jonggun's kick, which directly hit his shoulder and knocked him down. Realizing that Jonggun was starting to beat up Hyungsuk, Sojong tried to stop him, but Jonggun insisted that he was only doing his job to protect Sojong. When Jonggun is about to beat up Hyungsuk, Bosco suddenly appears and warns him not to cause chaos in his school. On the other hand, Hyungsuk is surprised by Bosco, who claims to be his friend and challenges Jonggun to a fight with him. Jonggun doesn't seem to be an ordinary young man, as he's quite tough when facing Bosco and feels confident that Bosco and Hyungsuk won't be able to beat him, even if they gang up on him. So Jong, who didn't want to cause trouble, finally threatened to report Jonggun, so Jonggun decided to stop the fight and left the place with Sojong, who apologized to Bosco and Hyungsuk because Jonggun had hurt them. After that incident, Hyungsuk and Bosco finally became friends, although Bosco still wanted to beat Hyungsuk in a sportive fight. Later that evening, Hyungsuk and Dukwa prepared to showcase their talents at the music festival. Before going on stage, they both thanked Jae-yul for preparing the outfits to perfect their performance. At first, Hyungsuk felt insecure because Hobin and Jonggi, who performed before them, received so much appreciation from the audience for their spectacular performance. However, Dukwa tried to convince Hyungsuk that they would be able to put on a greater performance than the other participants, and asked Hyungsuk to believe in his singing ability, as Hyungsuk was quite talented. Shortly afterward, the host called Hyungsuk and Dukwa to come on stage and sing their song, Fly Up. As usual, everyone seemed more interested in Hyungsuk and ignored the ugly Dukwa. However, once Dukwa started rapping on stage, the audience was mesmerized by his ability to rap so well, like a professional rapper. Their performance became even more perfect when Hyungsuk started singing with his melodious voice, making the audience hypnotized by the song they sang. I can see your eyes, I can see your face, I just want you with me, The combination of good lyrics and melodies added to the beauty of Fly Up, giving the impression that the song was created by a professional songwriter and music composer, instead of a high school student who was often considered a loser by his schoolmates. Hyung-suk and Dukwa's performance became the best performance of the festival, and they were awarded. In the midst of their excitement, the producer from LKS Entertainment then approached them and complimented them on their fantastic performance. The producer apologized for not auditioning Dukwa some time ago, but he was more interested in recruiting Hyung-suk to be a famous idol candidate debuted by his company. Hearing that, Dukwa became sad and disappointed, because again he was only seen physically, not based on his abilities. On the other hand, Hyung-suk, who had no interest in becoming an idol, politely refused the producer's offer and tried to catch up with Dukwa, who had left the school because he felt too disappointed. Afterwards, Dukwa and Jiho meet the fat Hyung-suk to show the video of Dukwa and the handsome Hyung-suk's performance on stage that has been viewed online by thousands of people. Although the video had been edited to give Hyung-suk more screen time, Dukwa didn't seem to care, as the unfair treatment he received only made him more excited to write the song. Hyung-suk says that Dukwa's song can inspire people to rise above adversity and feel confident in their abilities. The scene then switches and shows a famous idol named DG, who seems impressed with Hyung-suk and Dukwa's performance as he watches a video of their performance uploaded to social media. DG then sends the video to Sojong, who immediately realizes that the song is the same song that the fat Hyung-suk sang when she came to the convenience store where Hyung-suk worked a while ago. Sojong then wonders how the fat Hyung-suk could know the song when it's a song created by Dukwa that isn't played for the public. After watching the video, Sojong turns her gaze to a fat girl who is asleep in her bed and wonders if Hyung-suk is experiencing the same thing as her. The series ends by showing the fat Hyung-suk, who has just returned home after a night of part-time work. After washing his face, Hyung-suk prepares for bed and lets the handsome Hyung-suk take over his consciousness. When the handsome Hyung-suk is preparing to go to school, a series of photos are shown of Hyung-suk, both fat and handsome, with his mother and his schoolmates who have now become close to him. The moral message we can learn from this series is don't judge people based on their appearance, because judging a person does not define who they are, but it defines who you are.